Okay, here we go. Courgette carbonara. What could possibly go wrong? Welcome to the kitchen at Wyatt Towers. My house isn't actually called Wyatt Towers, it's called Willow Lodge, but you know, hey ho. And in the next 18 to 20 minutes, I'm going to show you how to make courgette carbonara from scratch. The only thing that I have done before we got started is I've just put the water on to boil for my pasta, so you probably hear that bubbling away. I'm going to start off by chopping my onion. So the first thing I'm going to do is just cut a medium white onion in half, and then I'm just going to quickly peel it. Now here's the top tip straight away. If your onions make you cry, then one of the ways that you can make sure that that doesn't happen is by not cutting the root off. If you don't cut the root off when you're chopping an onion, that's just going in my compost bin, hold on, then by some miracle of magic that I don't understand, it means that you don't cry. Amazing, isn't it? So if you leave the root on your onion when you're chopping it, then you will find that the tears are a thing of the past. So I've just taken the skin off my onion, as I say, popping that in my compost bin, and then I'm going to go ahead and chop them. So I'm going to cut the tip off, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to slice the onion horizontally from tip to root, first of all, with a very sharp knife. That's really important. So I was going through that first half, and then I'm going to turn it back to face me where the tip was, and I'm going to cut it vertically. And I'm doing fairly large dice as I go through this. 1 second, slippy bit. There we go. And then I'm going to turn it back towards me, chop it again, and then I am getting a rough dice. This is home cooking after all. I am not James Martin, so it is not a fine dice in the way that they seem to be able to do whilst you're watching them on the telly and wondering how they don't take their knuckles off at the same time. So I'm just doing that with the other half of the onion. Cut it horizontally first, then vertically, then turn it back on itself so that you have diced onion in the blink of an eye and no tears. So I'm just going to put the bits into my compost bin. Mr. Chewit will be proud. There we go. And then it's time to get some heat on under my pan. So I'm using a cast iron pan. So when using, if you're going to use a cast iron pan, you need to make sure that you keep the heat below medium. If you get it too high, when we come to make the carbonara sauce a little bit later on, what you're going to end up with is scrambled egg. So you just need to make sure, just get that out of the way whilst that's going, that medium heat. So I've got mine coming up on a 5. And what I'm going to do first of all is just add, this is again home cooking, I'm going to add a slosh of olive oil. Feel free to have your own slosh, whether that's a big slosh or a little slosh. I'm going for a fairly large slosh. There you go, slosh it is. I'll just put that out of the way. And I'm also going to add a very small knob of butter. Embrace your inner James Martin. 2 things happen with that. The butter helps to emulsify the sauce later on, but also the butter and the oil work together to make sure that the butter won't burn, because the oil keeps the temperature constant. So this is really useful tip if you're doing a long fry, if you're wanting to caramelize onions. If you just use butter, it will quite often catch. But if you add a little bit of olive oil, and that's just a really light, flavorless oil, then it will stop that happening. And I'm just going to move that around in the pan a little bit just to get it all over the bottom as that heats up. So my water is on. That is starting to come up to the bubble. I have chopped my onion. That's waiting to go in the pan. That is just starting to warm through, which is great. And as soon as that does, then I will pop the onions in and come to the next step. Now, those of you who come to get your grow on, check those out. Ta! So when I did the practice run yesterday, Ollie said, Ollie, my husband, said, do you want me to go and get you a courgette from the garden? I said, no, there's only 2 that are ready and I need them for tomorrow. So here we go, just warming through. So you'll notice here that the butter is just starting to foam. That's what I want. I don't want it to be really, really high temperature at this point. I'm going to add the onions in. There we go. So that's a whole white onion. I use Spanish sweet onions just because they're a little bit less aggressive, and that's all in the pan, like the hands. And then what I'm going to do is just give that a little stir, just a little bit, just to coat it round in the oil and the butter. There we go. Quick check of the heat, there we are, and I'm going to leave that alone now whilst I get on with the courgettes. It's really tempting to keep messing about with it, you know, poke it, prod it and stir it. But what I want this to do is just to start to let the onions to release their juices into the pan with this low heat. So again, it's just, I can just about feel the heat coming through now. If I put my hand there, it will just start to sizzle. That's what I'm looking for, so that we're then getting a soft cooked onion rather than a fried onion, okay? So now it's time to deal with these bad boys. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to take my Speedy Peeler, okay? Other forms of vegetable peelers are of course available. Now I like to use this because it gives me ribbons of courgette. You can always slice it normally, you know, across the way, or do thin slices if you've got good knife skills or a mandolin. But all I'm going to do is just to start peeling it onto my board so that I'm getting ribbons like this of courgette, okay? You can hear the onions starting to fry now. The water is just getting there. So I'm going to go through as quickly as I can to go ahead and speedy peel this. Speedy peelers are also much safer than mandolins. Trust me, I've been on the wrong end of that on several occasions. So I obviously washed the courgette before I did this. That was the other bit of prep that I did beforehand. And I brought 2 courgettes in, but again, when you start to peel, you'll get an idea of whether or not you need both of them. You can see this is quite a big pile of courgette coming here, and I haven't finished yet. So I will probably just use the one. So I'm just going to keep on going, and then you'll get to a point where that happens, okay? The courgette will break because the middle is getting a bit weak. So you can carry on with some shorter bits, which I'm just going to go through here. And I'll pop that down for a second. Let's get you out of the way. And with the other piece, but I'm not going to waste anything. Now it's getting a bit too thin to be able to peel it. What I'm going to do is just take the stalk end off, and that will also go in the compost. And then I'm just very quickly going to slice as thinly as I can what's left of the courgette to go in as well, because I don't want to waste any of it at all, particularly since I grew it. So, you know, there's been a lot of love and attention onto this courgette. So I want to use absolutely every single bit. I'm just doing that now. And voila, that, ladies and gentlemen, is 1 courgette. That's a whole bunch of courgette going on in there. And now what I'm going to do is just give my onions a little stir. And I'm going to put the hand-sliced bits of courgette in first, because they're a bit thicker than the ribbons that I did with the peeler. I'm going to put those in first so they can start to soften up. And this is what's really important now, is when you're working with the courgette at this point, what you want is for it to be soft. You don't want it to fry. So I'm going to move that around in the pan a little bit. Again, I'm keeping my eye on the colour of my onions. I want them to start to be translucent. Here comes the water, which is great. So whilst they start to soften, into my pan here of boiling water, up it comes. I'm going to put some pasta. So I'm using penne today, and a good rule of getting the portions right is handfuls. So for me, I would put in, there you go, didn't I drop one? 2, 3, 4 for lunch. I'm going to put an extra one in because I promised Ollie leftovers, so 5. Okay, so that's 5 handles, roughly around about 200, 250 grams of pasta. So that's gone in the pan with the water that is just coming now back to the boil. Dylan is now going after the pasta shell that I dropped. I'm just going to give that a very gentle stir just to make sure that none of the pasta is stuck on the bottom. And then I'm just going to pop the lid halfway on and take it off a fast boil. Otherwise, all that will happen is the water will start to boil over. If I take it off a hard boil and just put it on a rolling boil, then it will go ahead and carry on cooking without making a mess of my cooker. So you've then got the larger bits of courgette now starting to soften up, and I can be quite robust with those larger bits of courgette in the pan because they're that bit thicker. Okay, so I'm going to again leave those now just to soften up a bit whilst I get on with making the carbonara sauce. So the first thing that I'm going to do is take a jug, and I'm going to break 2 whole eggs into that jug. I can't do the fancy chefy thing of breaking an egg with one hand. Then I'm going to take a 3rd egg. There we go. And all I want from the next 2 eggs are just the yolk. So I'm going to take the egg whites into another bowl. There we go. So all in all, you're using 4 eggs, 2 whole ones, 2 egg yolks. Save the whites. And if you don't want to immediately make a pavlova, which, you know, I guess that not everybody does, my husband does, you can freeze egg whites. So just go ahead and pop them in a Ziploc bag or a small Tupperware, write down how many they are, and then defrost them when you are ready to make a pavlova or a meringue or something like that, and it's all good to go. We waste nothing here at Wyatt Towers. So I'm just going to give the eggs a very gentle beat in my jug. I'm going to set those to one side. You can hear the water now is bubbling away. I'm going to again just give these a very gentle stir, really there. Then I'm going to take a good old-fashioned box grater and my Parmesan. Now, please, for the love of God, I know that it is really, really tempting to buy ready grated Parmesan. Please don't. It's the equivalent of eating sawdust. This piece of Parmesan, when it's a whole piece, it was about 300 grams. It cost about £3 from Tesco. It will last for ages. So if you then just wrap it in a bit of greaseproof and then a bit of foil and pop it in the fridge, it will last for ages. What you want with Parmesan is just to stop it drying out, that's all. So I'm going to use around about half of this piece. So I'm just going to go ahead and start to grate that. I want a fine grate because what I want this to do is to melt in the pan. 1 second, that's getting a little cheeky there. There we go. So I'm just going to carry on grating. Box grater is great for this. Again, food processor, blah, all good. But if you're going to do a cookery demo from scratch, you might as well get all the hard work done. So I'm just about got enough cheese grated there. My mum would be proud. There we go. So that bit I would go ahead and wrap in a bit of greaseproof, wrap it again in foil, and I would pop it in the fridge where it will happily stay for ages. So my pasta is now coming towards the boil. My onions are now translucent, so I'm just going to have a quick look at the pasta. So the pasta's probably got about another 5 minutes to go, which is absolutely perfect. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add the rest of the courgette into the pan. There we go. Get all bits in, don't waste a single bit. Using my fingers to spread it out, and the reason I'm using my fingers to spread it out is because these ribbons are really thin. If I start to go in there with the spatula too much, I'm going to break them up, and I'm going to end up with just mushy bits of courgette. So I'm just going to make sure that as much of them have got access to the heat as possible, and then I'm going to turn the heat down. So I'm turning it down from what was mid-range on my cooker of about 5. I'm taking it down to 3. There's 2 reasons for this. These courgettes, I simply want to warm through. I don't want them to become slippery and mushy and overcooked. But also because I'm using a cast iron pan, I need to reduce the heat in the pan so that when I add the sauce to the carbonara, I don't end up with scrambled egg, or at least that's the plan. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that in there. I'm just going to give it a little bit of seasoning. I'm not going to put any salt in right now because Parmesan is salty on its own. And of course, I've got heavily salted water for the pasta. But I am going to add a little bit of black pepper at this point because the heat of the pan, so a couple of good brines, the heat of the pan will just take some of the heat out of the pepper at this point. And then I'm just going to very gently turn it round and move it around as gently as I can to make sure that all of those ribbons of pasta have got some of that pasta, ribbons of courgette. I've got some of those lovely, soft, buttery onions all over them. There we go. And it's all stirred through really well. And then I am just going to leave it at this point. So I'm just going to bring the onions down off the side. Now at this stage, if you're a garlic lover, this is a good time if you wanted to add some roast garlic that you've already made before. I'm not going to do a blue Peter. Here's one I made earlier moment. But it is a good point to put some roasted garlic in if you wanted to. I'm doing a vegetarian version today. You can also add fried bacon to your carbonara. You could put the bacon in at the beginning with the onions and crisping that up, and then going forward with the recipe from there. It also works well with mushrooms if you've got mushrooms that need using. You fry those off with the onions to begin with as well. It basically is one of those great starter dishes that you can adapt to whatever you want to be able to use or what you need to use. And of course, this time of year when you're a gardener as well, there's quite a lot of stuff coming out the garden. So it's a good thing to think about what could you add that you need to. I'm just taking that down a little tad. There we go. Okay, so my pasta is now just about done. So this is where I have to disappear and try not to trip over the dog to go ahead and drain my pasta. So hold that thought whilst I do exactly that. Turn the water off. Back in a moment. Okay, so I've drained my pasta, and what I've done is just left the colander on top of the pan because I want to catch a little bit of that pasta water in the bottom of the pan for a little bit later on. Okay, so that's now nicely al dente penne, which is a good thing. And I am going to also, there's always one thing you leave behind, isn't it? Is also get my serving bowl. So I'm going to pop that over here. All right, so at this stage, I am just going to turn the courgettes again in the pan. So you can see now that those ribbons are softening up, but they've not disintegrated. Okay, so it's all nice and warm, which is great. So at this stage, what I'm going to do is come back to my beaten eggs. I'm going to give them another quick beat, and then I'm going to add the parmesan to it. So I was going to knock off what's sitting in the box grater and get as much of that yummy, yummy, yummy parmesan in there as I can, and I'm going to give it a little stir. Okay, so it's all going to go in at once, but I just want to give it a stir at that point. Okay, so put my hand over the courgettes. There should be warmth, but not heat, okay? Because at this point, we need to be careful not to scramble the eggs. But you know what? If you scramble the eggs or they start to look like they're going to scramble, it's not the end of the world. Flatten it all out, let it set, and you've got carbonara omelette. What's not to like about that? So here we go. I'm going to give it a little stir together. Wish me luck. What could possibly go wrong? And in it goes. So all of it in, and then start stirring and bring as much of that out of the pan as you can. Don't let the eggs sit for too long. There we go. And I'm just going to start to stir that round very gently. I am not looking to scramble this egg. I am looking to emulsify this sauce. And as soon as I have got the first few stirs in, I'm going to add the pasta, and I'm going to add the little bit of pasta water that I kept in the bottom of the pan, because that all helps to emulsify this sauce. It's on a low heat, and what I'm doing now is just stirring this through, and what I'm looking for are the grains of parmesan that I could see in the sauce when it went in. I'm looking for those grains of parmesan to start to disappear. Okay, I wish I had smelly vision, because this smells absolutely amazing. And I'm just going to stir that through, and I'm starting now to see the sauce emulsify. Now, this was one of the things that I quite often craved during going through chemotherapy, because my taste buds went to pop in that time. And the reason that I craved it was actually all because of the texture. It's really, really luxurious. I couldn't particularly taste it all that much, but I just loved that lovely silky feel. And somebody said to me at that point, but you shouldn't be eating that, it's raw egg. No, it isn't raw egg. Look, see, I'm cooking it. So the fact is, you're cooking the egg on a really low heat, but you are cooking the egg through. So don't worry about it being raw egg that you're serving to people. And I'm just going to keep stirring that through. And once that initial stir, etc., has happened, the point of scrambling that egg has now passed, because it's hit the heat. It hasn't scrambled. I can now stop moving it all the time, because all I'm going to do now is to get ready to serve it, which is probably when I'm going to regret using this pan, because it weighs a ton. So I'm going to grab a bowl. Now, in all honesty, folks, in the week, do I bother serving it in a bowl every time? No, I serve it straight out the pan. But what I'm going to do is just get ready to serve it up. And here's a top tip from a chef friend when you're thinking about pasta dishes. Season the bowl, not the pasta. And then when you head it in with the rest of the sauce, you can stir it through without getting more of the seasoning in the pan. So I'm just going to put 2 or 3 twists of black pepper in the bottom of my serving bowl, and a very, very light bit of salt, just 2. Okay. So again, I'll just keep stirring my sauce here before I get ready to do some powerlifting with this pan. There we go. Okay, now this is home cooking, so before I take it out the pan, I'm just going to test the sauce to make sure that the Parmesan is melted. So I want to make sure that there are no little grains of Parmesan, which there are not. Yay me. So now it is time for weightlifting for beginners, whilst I just get that into my serving bowl and then scrape as much of the goodness out of there as I can. Please hold. Let me tell you, this pan is heavy. Okay, so I'm going to get that out of the way. Pop it over there on the side. And then the very last thing I'm going to do is just give that a turn in the bowl to bring that seasoning up from the bottom. So I'm just giving it a little twist, and you can see the pepper coming up. And just set it round in the bowl, just get rid of those last bits at the top. And then the very last thing I'm going to do is to take some fresh basil from my greenhouse, Mr. Tulip, and I'm just going to rip it, not going to cut it. Basil doesn't like to be cut, it will go black at the edges. I'm just going to rip it over the top.
You could do with you slightly to the left, Mrs. Wyatt.
Oh, I'm just trying to avoid the hot ring on the
I know.
There we go.
Yeah,
there we go. So I'm just ripping it along the top like that, rather than cutting it. And voila, courgette carbonara in roughly 20 minutes, live from the kitchen at Wyatt Towers. Smells amazing.
Wow, thank you, Sheena. Carla would like to see your scrapey thing that you cut your courgettes up with. Could you hold that up to the camera for a second?
I certainly can. Hang on. It is my Speedy Peeler. So if you just jump on Amazon and literally put in Speedy Peeler, you'll get something like this. My top tip though is don't get a plastic one, because the handles break really quite quickly. Get one that's metal and it will last for ages.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Sheena after that rather awesome demonstration?
I might just have to test it while I'm here, because it tastes really good. It smells really good. Yeah, I can say that it's yum. Definitely yum.
Is that a portion for 2 then?
In my house, yes. So that would be a portion for 2. I would probably have 2 spoonfuls of that. Ollie would eat the rest.
Yeah.
He's a growing lad after all.
That would work out quite good for me and George then.
Yeah, absolutely. Leftovers wise, something you can also think about if you've got some left and you don't have, you know, like I do, so I just stick it in a Tupperware and Ollie takes it to work, is that you can actually make little arancini type things out of this. So let it go cold and let it set, because the egg mixture will set, and then form it into balls, roll it in some breadcrumbs, and deep fry it if you have a deep fryer, or make them into patties. And you've got, you know, little courgette, pasta, cheesy eggy sauce patties that you can cook in the oven. I do that quite often because I'm really bad at actually catering for the right number of people. So, you know, if I've got people around for dinner, I will make twice this amount and then wonder why 4 people don't eat it all. So that is something that you can do with that. If you're going to freeze it, which you can freeze courgette carbonara, the only thing I would say is, if you can be bothered, pick off the fresh basil, because it will just go black in the freezer. But you can freeze it, then just let it defrost naturally. Don't defrost it in a microwave, because you'll end up recooking the egg and recooking the pasta, and it will just go mushy and horrible. But you can just let it defrost at room temperature, and then a quick stir through in a warm pan, and you've got courgette carbonara for the second time. I'm going to be eating this all week.
Thank you. Are you going back to the office now?
I am, yes. I'm going to go back to the office via grabbing a quick glass of water. So I'll see you back in there.
See you in a minute.
Okie dokie.